We are presenting this webinar around updates on treatments for pulmonary fibrosis. We have a stellar lineup of speakers for today with both an expert clinician as well as consumers living with PF. But before we get started, I will hand over to our speakers to introduce themselves so everyone joining can put a face to the names. So to our speakers, if you could just please share a little bit more about yourselves and your journey and to give people some context of your backgrounds, that would be fantastic. I'll hand over to you, Dan, and then we can follow the order on the slides after you.
Thanks very much, Tara, and thanks so much to Lung Foundation Australia for the opportunity to speak to you today and for hosting this webinar. So I'm a lung transplant physician, and many of you are probably aware that lung transplantation is sometimes an option for people who have very severe lung fibrosis. And indeed, now pulmonary fibrosis is the most common reason why someone might need a lung transplant, and that really became the most common reason in 2007. So that's my background. I have been working in the field of lung fibrosis for about 25 years or something like that, and I've noticed a huge change in the amount of certainly research that is going on and the availability of new therapies, especially in the last decade. And that's been really gratifying because I do remember at the beginning of my career being very frustrated that there was so much effort and research dedicated towards, for example, asthma and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, not to diminish the importance of those diseases, but really nothing for my patients who had this terrible lung fibrosis condition. So that has switched around, which is really gratifying. So I'm delighted to speak to you today, and very pleased to welcome two of my dear patients, Jeff and Kevin. So I'll hand over now for them to introduce themselves and give you their perspective on the kind of care that I do or don't deliver.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to join this webinar and hear a little bit about me and my struggle with IPF. I was diagnosed in April 2021. I had no idea what IPF was, never heard of it before. So it's been a journey of exploration and fact-finding, really, for me. I was born in Portsmouth in England, same as Charles Dickens. That's where he was born as well. And I'm a chartered electronics engineer. I'm mad about sports. Played football, soccer, up until I was about 47. And my main passion is supporting my team, which is Portsmouth Football Club. I love cricket, love swimming and cycling, although cricket, swimming and cycling is very much reduced now. Can't really do it with the condition I've got. But there you are. That's me in a nutshell.
Thank you, Professor Dan. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Jeff. Yes. My name is Kevin Harrison. I was diagnosed back in 2014, thanks to Professor Dan and his team. And I was told at that time that I'm a very, 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 very lucky man. He'd just come back from overseas in Germany, and there was a couple of breakthroughs and tablets, etc., which I was been on for close to 10 years. I have 3 sons and a daughter, 6 grandchildren and 3 great-grandkids, which I want to enjoy seeing growing up. I am passionate, similar to Jeff, on sports. I've just come back. My 2 sons, 50-year-old sons, took me to Vegas to watch the Broncos get beaten. I shouldn't bring that up, sorry. And but that's fine. We had a lovely time, and I was looked after like royalty. I played a lot of senior football, rugby union, and then competitive squash. I have been a peer for other people who have lung conditions, and I enjoy doing that and offering any service that I can. I think, as Professor Dan knows, my attitude towards it is, if I can do something to help someone else, let's get out there and put your hand up. So that's my little story, and thanks to the team that I'm working with, Professor Dan and his team, I'm very, very fortunate. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you, Kevin. And thank you as well to you, Jeff and Dan. Very excited to hear the presentation and lived experience insights today. So we will kick off today's webinar with a presentation from Dan on updates in PF treatments. And then afterwards, we will have our pre-submitted question portion for our consumer panel. And then followed by the live Q&A as mentioned earlier. So please feel free to submit any questions that you may have for the panelists to answer as they're speaking.
Again, thank you very much for the opportunity. So look, I'm going to give you a bit of an update on pulmonary fibrosis treatment. I am going to keep it reasonably short because I think it's important that we have plenty of time for the Q&A. But really the take-home message is that if I was excited when I saw Kev back in 2014, I'm even more excited now because we know a huge amount more about pulmonary fibrosis and what causes it. And that will lead to new treatments, absolutely no question, than we did certainly even maybe 3 or 4 years ago. So I'm going to share a little bit of that information. First of all, this is Rare Disease Day, but pulmonary fibrosis is not actually a rare disease. So I guess the other take-home message is that for people listening today who are living with pulmonary fibrosis, you are absolutely not alone. You have, these wonderful consumers, Kevin, Jeff with you today, but many other people. And, again, a shout out to LFA, which provides amazing resources and support through the consumer groups that it supports around a number of lung diseases, but particularly in pulmonary fibrosis. So this disease is actually getting more common, pulmonary fibrosis. And that's partly because it is more common in older people and the whole world is getting older. It's also because people are more aware of this as a cause of of breathlessness. So that said, it's still very common for me to see someone who's been seen by a cardiologist typically for a year because they're breathless. It's always thought to be the heart, and then eventually come to see me or someone else, and we find out that this is obviously lung fibrosis is the problem. So unfortunately, that's still an issue, but definitely more awareness, and so more people being diagnosed at an earlier stage when the treatments are going to be more effective. That said, we still only have 2 treatments that are available that are proven to be effective. And by effective, what I mean is that they reduce the decline over time. They don't reverse what's already happened, and they don't even stop it getting worse. They just reduce the decline. So many of you will be aware of these 2 medications, nintedanib or Ofev, and pirfenidone, which used to be Esbriet, but now is just the generic pirfenidone. And many of you will be aware that they do have significant side effects, in many cases manageable with some care and attention, but nevertheless significant side effects. You'll see the bottom there is a graph of this is United States veterans data, which is probably the most thorough investigation of the prevalence of this condition. And so this is cases per 100,000, and you can see in 2019, it was up to like 1 in 100 people, veterans. So they're an older population who have this condition. So it's by no means a rare condition. It's just under-recognised is the problem. I'm going to tell you a tiny bit about some science, because that is important so you can understand where the new treatments are coming from. And so thanks to these authors from this recent publication for this, pretty excellent, I think, figure. And I think the take home here is that unless we really understand the cause of pulmonary fibrosis, we're going to struggle to find a treatment. So in exactly the same way that if you take your car to the mechanic, and unless the mechanic can work out what's wrong with the car and specifically fix that thing, it's unlikely the car is going to recover. All right, and that is equally true in medicine. The good news is that we now understand a lot more about what causes lung fibrosis than we did, as I said, even a few years ago. This is a picture of an alveolus, which is the little air sac. So we're right at the end of your lung, okay? There's millions of these in your lung. They're tiny, tiny little structures. And this is where all of the action is in pulmonary fibrosis. And these are the cells lining the air sacs there. And the key bits are that we now know, of course, that this is a lung scarring condition. And quite rightly, the first drugs that became available were targeting lung scarring. But what they don't fix is the underlying problem which caused the scarring in the first place. So they're very helpful to try and ameliorate scarring or stop it getting worse, but they don't correct the underlying problems. And the important bits of new information, which I'll come to, are the upstream problems which lead eventually to lung fibrosis. And many of these are related to some genetic abnormalities that we now understand a lot more about. and also some key cell types that we know are causing a lot of havoc in this tiny little region of the lung, which we didn't even know about 5 years ago. So we now know about those cells. I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. So these are the sort of breakthroughs. So specifically, and there are more than this, but one of the key breakthroughs has been understanding that pulmonary fibrosis is fundamentally, in many cases, not all, but in many cases, is a disease of accelerated aging of the lung. That is what it is. So it's a process whereby the lung cells are getting older much more quickly than they should. And the normal cells that line the air sacs, eventually, because they can't continue to replicate, effectively die. And rather than losing the barrier, our body is well programmed to repair that barrier, but repairs it with scar rather than with a healthy cell population. And that's what causes the condition. So the way that we measure aging inside all of our cells is through this intracellular clock called a telomere, which is the bit right at the end of the chromosome, which protects it. And everybody, as they get older, those things get shorter, and it is like a clock. You can work out how old someone is if you look at the telomere length. But in people who have pulmonary fibrosis, over half people have severe shortening of the telomere region, and the cells in the lung are particularly affected. You and your doctors very likely will have asked you about early graying of the hair in yourself or in your family members, and they're asking that question because that's one of the characteristics of this condition. The other thing that's really interesting is we've identified that herpes virus infections, which are very common, are much more common in pulmonary fibrosis lung. And importantly, those viruses, out of all of the places in the human genome that they could insert themselves to do their business as viruses, they've chosen the telomere region to insert themselves. So I think that's not a coincidence, and probably feeds into our understanding of what causes the disease. The next bit on the top right there, and I'm sorry, this is sort of showing a bit strange here, but anyway, you can get the gist. Sort of like it got a shadow effect. So there's been some amazing technological breakthroughs in the last few years, which have allowed us to understand or to find a cell type which is previously hidden because we couldn't analyze it using standard microscopes and other things. Without going into too much detail there, this is a very potently pro-fibrotic or scarring cell called a macrophage in the lung. So we now know about that cell, and my lab and multiple other labs around the world have identified this cell in all forms of pulmonary fibrosis, and it pumps out some pretty nasty chemicals that perpetuate the scarring process. So that's good to know about that. What's even more important is that now it gives us an opportunity to develop treatments that switch those cells off, and that's exactly what's happening. Then at the same time, there are new approaches to treatment which allow us to treat things that we were previously unable to treat. And a lot of this is related, is technology that's related to the COVID vaccine technology. So it's mRNA therapeutic technology. So it's not a vaccine, it's an mRNA product that is a treatment. And I'll talk to you a little bit about what's being developed there as well. All of the research that is done in Australia by our amazing group is supported by our consumers. And these are people, some of you might be watching, this might be your picture, but is supported by people who really help us to understand, what it is like to live with pulmonary fibrosis, what is really important to our patients who are living with pulmonary fibrosis, where do they want to focus our research, and where shouldn't we focus our research. And so if you're interested, this is just a little shout out to please get in touch with Lung Foundation. There are always opportunities to participate in these advisory groups. But just a little bit about the current, so there are clinical trials currently underway that are examining some of these new treatments. And this is just a little snapshot of what's happened over the last sort of 15 years in lung fibrosis research. So on the x-axis there, the bottom, that's what we understand about what causes lung fibrosis. So fibrosis on the far left, sure, it is fibrotic, but actually it's caused by some cells in the middle that we now know about. And then fundamentally, it's often caused by these changes in the genes, and particularly telomere shortening on the far right. we know from other diseases that if you target those pathways that are really right at the beginning of the disease, then you're much more likely to fix the disease. So probably the best example in respiratory medicine is in cystic fibrosis, which is an inherited lung condition. I used to be a cystic fibrosis specialist before I became a transplant specialist. And back then we were always using treatments that were like nebulizers and things to try and open up the airways and things like that, which helped a little bit, but they didn't really help very much. And it wasn't until there were treatments developed that fixed the underlying genetic problem that mean that now cystic fibrosis is a completely different proposition. People can live long, healthy lives with cystic fibrosis, and that's all because of that those treatments targeting the gene. And I think the same thing is going to be true for pulmonary fibrosis. So now that we understand these really fundamental problems, we can develop treatments that should fix them. So just a little bit of work that we've been doing. So this is targeting that abnormal cells, those profibrotic cells that we've found in the lung. And so what we've done is paired, so we've got a whole biobank of these cells in my laboratory from people who are having a treatment for silicosis, actually, is where we got the cells from. But what we've done is paired with this amazing resource at Griffith University in Brisbane, Rowan Dennis there on the bottom left, where they've collected compounds from all over Queensland, reef, rainforest, etc. And we're able to screen those compounds to see which ones might switch off these abnormal cells. And we have found some highly effective treatments, one of which is a compound that has come from the root of a North Queensland rainforest tree, which switches these cells off. And so we're very excited about the prospect of being able to take some of these to clinical trials. What's happening already, though, is that there is already a treatment that is now in phase 2, and I'm happy if anybody's interested to give it more information about what happens in terms of clinical trial phases. But now in phase 2, which, as you might imagine, of the 1, 2, 3 is the middle bit of a completely new treatment for pulmonary fibrosis that also switches off these cells. So this is actually happening now. So this study is being conducted at several sites in Australia. And is on the PACT website, which I'll show you about in a second. And it's a drug called axatilimab, which is being given every 2 weeks intravenously, and switches off these pro-scarring cells. So we're very excited about the possibility that that might hold as a new treatment approach, really getting to the heart of the issue with pulmonary fibrosis. It's a clinical trial, so we don't know whether it works yet, but it certainly works very well in a related lung condition. So, that's an exciting prospect. Just as exciting, I think, is the prospect of treating some of the underlying genetic abnormalities. And I find myself, I feel I'm very fortunate to be working with an amazing company that comes out of San Francisco, which has developed an mRNA treatment that extends those telomeres that I was telling you about. So those little clocks inside the cell. This drug, it hasn't gone into clinical trials yet. That'll be next year. But in human cells and in all of the animal models that we've done, extends those telomeres. So one dose of this product reverses about 7 years worth of cell aging. So quite an incredible achievement. So that'll be going into clinical trials next year, and we'll be targeting people who have pulmonary fibrosis related to short telomeres. So please keep your eyes out for that prospect, which will be the first treatment that's really treating the fundamental cause of pulmonary fibrosis in many people. And again, this is an mRNA technology. So it's like the COVID vaccine technology. It's an mRNA therapeutic. So there's an mRNA, which is the code for the gene inside a little fat droplet called a lipid nanoparticle, which is able to deliver the mRNA to the stem cells in the lung so that they can recover and start repairing the lung. So I'm very excited about the prospect of this product and where this field will lead. Meanwhile, we are also we're conducting at the moment a trial phase 2 again of danazol in pulmonary fibrosis related to short telomeres, because we think that drug has the potential also to lengthen telomeres in the cells in the lung. So again, the information about that trial is available through the PACT website, which I'll tell you about in a second if you're not sure what that is. So these are the summaries, really major breakthroughs in understanding the last 5 years, which I know absolutely will translate into effective therapies. I don't know which ones those will be yet, but I'd urge you to consider participating in clinical trials because it might help you participating in the trial, may not, but it will certainly help people in the future. We now understand about how important those changes in the genes are to drive pulmonary fibrosis, and we know about that cell that causes the fibrosis, and also no doubt developing treatments that target both of those are going to be complementary to the existing antifibrotic treatments, so that we can come up with an approach that not only slows the disease progression but stops it, and maybe even a little bit of reversal is, what would be wonderful. So this is PACT. So PACT is the Pulmonary Fibrosis Australasian Clinical Trials Network, and this is an amazing resource supported by Lung Foundation Australia. We know, and I know that I run a lot of clinical trials in pulmonary fibrosis, but we know that there are many more people out there who are trying to find information about what they could do about this diagnosis, but are just unsure where to find it. If you're one of those people, this is where you need to go. So this website here, pact.lungfoundation.com.au, and you will find great information there about available, not just about clinical trials, but specifically about clinical trials that you could participate in and where you can find contacts in your state. So this network is all over Australia and New Zealand. So wherever you are, there will be a clinical trial site that's accessible to you, so you can get more information and participate. And some of the treatments I've told you about, well, all of them actually are listed on the trial site there. So I think that's all I really wanted to say. Very happy to take any questions as they come, Tara, but and very excited about where we're going to be. Certainly by the end of my career, I think completely different position to where we were, at the beginning of my career in terms of pulmonary fibrosis. Thanks very much again.
Thank you, Dan. That was a really insightful presentation, and yeah, just echoing what you said, it's very exciting to hear the prospects of what's in the works, and yeah, hopefully we do get some better treatment options for pulmonary fibrosis out of these. So very exciting. So we will now continue with our pre-submitted questions. So just moving along to our consumer panel. So the first pre-submitted question we have for today is, what support have you found helpful in managing your PF? Now we'll start with Kevin for this one, and then we'll follow with Jeff.
I believe I'm extremely lucky having met Professor Dan and his team 10 years ago. I started off having nintedanib, and then went on to but I had the problems with side effects from the nintedanib, diarrhea, stuff like that. And then 4 or 5 years ago, Professor Dan put me on pirfenidone, and I've handled that extremely well. In relation to the team at Professor Dan's is, unfortunately, Dan may not like this, but they've actually become friends. His nurses, his staff, even the receptionists are really quite unique people. And I've said to my family and to a lot of people, you generally don't like going to the doctor or the professor, but I look forward to going to Wallace Street. So there you go, Dan. It's a real feather in your cap the way you and your team runs. And as I said, we can joke, we can look at the serious side, and I consider them basically friends. And there's a couple of young nurses there and a couple of young staff there that are all part of the family, and it's really quite unique. In relation to my family, I took one of my sons with me. He insisted coming to meet Professor Dan many years ago because he didn't think I was telling the truth anyway. And Dan met him, and since then my family has been totally supportive. My friends, in relation to my friends, how do I best put it? I don't want to labor on it, but they always ask me, how did your tests go? And because with the breathing tests, I try and make sure that I can at least stay the same percentage of breath than what I did last time. And at the moment, that's happening. Whether it's because of the treatment we've been giving, presumably it can't be the air, because it's been very hot over here in Brisbane, as you know, for a while. Then the peer support, having belonged to a peer group and run quite a few people over the last 3 or 4 years, it was really quite consoling to hear their tales. The main thing is to be careful that you're not becoming the physician. You just listen to them and be careful what I say anyway. And as I appreciate, I'm just down the road from where Professor Dan operates over here in Brisbane. Now that's pretty unique, and I feel for people who are in the country and so forth and fifth. But I'm very, very close at all sorts of things like that. But the peer support, I got a lot out of it, and hopefully the people that I was peering to do also.
So yeah, a sort of mirror exactly what Kevin's just been saying about all the people that are at the Wallace Road surgery. I don't think I've had such supportive and fantastic treatment ever anywhere for anything apart from at that clinic. Every one of them, including you, Dan, second to none. What I get is information that is correct. There's no hiding anything, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, which is what I want. I don't want to be told something that will keep me happy. I want to know exactly what's going on with my condition and how we're going about trying to stop it. As an engineer, I collect data for all sorts of things. So to be able to have the opportunity to conduct or be part of a clinical trial is, in my book, absolutely fantastic, because in some small way, I'm contributing to that research. I'm just one person in amongst hundreds, but however, I need to give something back, because we need more people to collect more data. The more data we get, the more granular the data will be, it's more accurate. So as Dan recommended, have a look at the website and see what trials you can get on. I'm really fortunate to be on one Dan mentioned earlier about axatilimab, is that correct? So I started actually taking the drug about 6 weeks ago, and yeah, no problem. The treatment has been fantastic, and the support from everybody has been fantastic. As far as family are concerned, when I first got diagnosed, pretty much everyone was upset, as I was, because I was told, oh, you've got 3 to 5 years to live. And when you're told that, that's not very nice. And it was rather matter of fact. Now, I've since discovered that that data is very, very old. And we need to raise awareness amongst GPs, clinicians, and then you don't go in there with a cough and then come out with an inhaler or antibiotics because you've got an infection. So we need to be able to raise awareness of what this disease actually is, and it gets diagnosed much earlier. Therefore, we can go on to the drugs that Kevin and Dan mentioned, which is nintedanib and pirfenidone. So if we can get all those, they do slow it down, and I've been on that for 2.5 years now. So I manage it, it's good, but we do need to get people diagnosed a lot earlier, and a lot more information which is relevant and true rather than old data. As far as my family are concerned, yeah, they're very supportive, obviously. They were very concerned at the start, but as I've gone on my journey since 2021, I think they've come along with me, and they're always asking about new developments and things. So they've been really, really good and really supportive, and that's friends and family.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jeff. And some really important points you shared there, especially around clinical trials and, you know, how critical they are to achieving those breakthroughs like Dan touched on earlier. So thank you. So we will move on to our second pre-submitted question. Now this one is around how do you manage the side effects of your medications that impact your daily life? Now, Jeff, did you want to start on this one and then we'll follow with Kevin?
Yeah, for sure. I don't mind. So the side effects. Well, I've one of the very fortunate ones, I think, that nintedanib doesn't affect me. I've had a few stomach cramps, and that's about it. So I think I'm really fortunate. I know some people like Kevin, they can't tolerate it. So the other opportunity is to go on to the other drug. But really, the side effects from that drug are minimal for me. However, I think the theory was that I have a hiatal hernia, and we think that that might have been a trigger for the condition. So I don't know. So I'm on a PPI, which manages that acid reflux. So I take one pill of that every day and 2 pills of nintedanib, which help. The other side effects, of course, is very, very breathless if I do anything strenuous, like attempt to run or swim or do anything like that. Even on a long walk with a dog, I have to say, no, I'm not going to walk out as quickly as I did before when I was younger. I have to slow down. And if I need to sit down and catch my breath, then that's what I do. It can be awkward when like all your kids are running along and they're miles ahead and you're sat down on a bench trying to catch your breath back. But I think with planning and telling everybody I might have to stop helps. I get very, very tired, but I'm fortunate that I don't do a manual job. I design stuff with a computer, so I'm sat down. But I do get very tired. But if I get really tired during the day, I'm just going to have a sleep for half an hour and recharge. So like I say, I'm very fortunate. I don't have many side effects to speak of, really.
Thanks, Jeff, for sharing. Kevin, did you want to add your lived experience?
Yes, thank you, team. How do you manage the side effects of your medications that impact your daily life? As I mentioned, I changed from one to the other. I just go back a little bit. Before I saw Professor Dan and his team, I had an individual assessment and I was given 4 to 6 years. I've got it in writing, 4 to 6 years survival. Well, here I am 10. So since I've met Professor Dan and his team, so similar to Jeff, it's not the sort of thing you want to hear, but it exists. So please have faith in what's going on and support it. I find I have to push myself in relation to exercise. I firmly believe, having been a sportsman all my life, you do tend to get a bit lazy and it's easy to sit down. But I've given up mowing lawns mainly because it wipes you out for the next day. But if I do my regular exercises, walk, I can't play rugby with the Grandies anymore because they'll beat me up, but that's fine. But all in all, I'm handling it as best I can. As I just said before, my 2 boys took me overseas, and that comes up in the next question. But all in all, the tiredness is there, but you have a rest, do some exercise, set yourself a couple of goals, tidy up, get things ready, and so forth and fifth. So yeah, I can't. I've adapted. I suppose I initially thought it was old age because I'm in my 70s, so I'm allowed to sit down occasionally and just go and watch the sport that the Grandies play. So that's similar to Jeff. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, it seems like you both are highlighting how important it is to really plan and pace yourself and slow down. And, it really comes down to that at the end of the day, managing day to day. So we'll move on to the final pre-submitted question. Now, I can see some people are submitting their questions in the Q&A box. Please continue to do so. We will get to those after this last one. So the final pre-submitted question is, how do you find travelling when living with PF? Now, Kevin, I'll hand to you to actually start for this one, given you have just come back from an overseas holiday. So you have that fresh lived experience. And then, Jeff, feel free to add your insights as well afterwards.
Yeah, that was quite fitting. How do you find travelling when living with PF? Well, late last year, as Professor Dan knows, I blew a lung, and luckily it was picked up pretty early from my GP, and the Professor wasn't happy about me travelling, naturally, being the man he is, and so I wasn't able to go. And anyway, this year, my boy said, come on, we'll go to Las Vegas. I think it was more for their excuse than mine. And I can honestly tell you, don't be afraid of using a wheelchair. I'm quite active, but I used a wheelchair and or similar sort of item, and the support throughout the airlines here in Australia and New Zealand was second to none. So please, my suggestion is don't not travel because you're frightened of using a wheelchair. It just worked so well. And then Professor Dan suggested that I have a what's it called, a portable oxygen consolidator, which I was able to arrange here. I thought I was going to have to get hold of it through the airlines, Delta Airlines, but I got one in town here, and I will mention it. I have mentioned it to Tara. It's called Breathe 21, BREATHE 21, and the manager is Tom Nash. And and really the support I got from there, Dan, Professor Dan, and the rest of you was second to none. So please, I was able to travel. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gone. You know what I mean? So I just think if you use what's available for you, the wheelchairs and that sort of thing, and take your oxygen. I had it on for the long trip, which is 18 hours, a longer one coming back from LA, and it just sits in your nose. And it's not a separate oxygen tank or anything. You're breathing the oxygen that's in the cabin, but it's purified, more purified for you. And I wouldn't have even noticed it was there, apart from a couple of little kids were laughing at me because I had a thing hanging out my nose. But that's fine. That's what it's all about. So does that answer the question? I just think please don't hesitate in going somewhere because you're breathless. You can go in the wheelchair, and because of the oxygen that's supplied. So that's my suggestion.
Thanks, Kevin. Jeff, moving on to you.
Yeah, I think like Kevin, I've done quite a lot of long haul, as you can imagine, back to the UK and here to Australia. We've flown from here to Alice Springs, where our daughter is, and so traveling around hasn't restricted me at all. I am a little bit younger than Kevin. I'm 63, so I haven't been suffering with the condition for as long as he has. But however, lugging suitcases around can be a bit of a trial, and I do get breathless when I'm sort of pushing a trolley around. But again, it doesn't restrict me. I did have an incident one time when I went back to the UK, where I don't know what they gave me on the airline food, but it didn't agree with me, and unfortunately I vomited, which then threw me into a panic because I couldn't catch my breath. But the airline staff were really good, and they gave me oxygen, and I calmed down after that. But I was definitely having a panic attack because I couldn't catch my breath, and the more I tried, the more I couldn't. But that was just one incident, and I think if I am having a coughing incident, it's how I manage that cough really, in any situation. But I don't find travelling, especially air travelling, that difficult. We are travelling around Australia in a car, so it's just driving a car around. So again, it's not a problem. It's just with heavy loads and things like that I struggle a little bit with. But I'm not restricted in where I go, where I travel at the moment. So I'm absolutely fine. I'm very fortunate.
Thanks, Jeff. Alrighty, so that wraps up our pre-submitted question portion. So we will move on to our live Q&A, and this is an open floor for all panelists. So I will just start. We have gotten quite a few questions. I will preface we won't be able to answer all of them today due to the limited time we have left, but we will try to get through as many as we can. And if we don't answer any, you can call our Information and Support Centre, and the number I will put on the slide towards the end. So the first question I wanted to put to the panel, and Dan includes yourself as well if you'd like to add anything, is apart from drug treatments, could you provide information about rehabilitation treatments or therapies that may be beneficial for managing symptoms and improving quality of life? Yeah, open floor.
Happy to take that one. Yeah, so thank you very much for the question. So yes, indeed, pulmonary rehabilitation is known to provide benefit in pulmonary fibrosis. So it doesn't help the lung problem itself, but it improves muscle strength. And I saw there was another question about pulmonary rehabilitation. I think that's been answered. So it's essentially a specialised exercise class is what pulmonary rehabilitation is, overseen by a specialist physiotherapist, usually runs for about 8 weeks, often twice a week. There are multiple providers all over Australia, and your local respiratory specialist or your GP should be able to provide your contact details and refer you along. So that provides benefit for all forms of pulmonary fibrosis. Oxygen therapy for some people will be helpful, so portable oxygen in particular, like Kevin was mentioning. And there are other measures that can be used to try and alleviate symptoms, particularly coughing and breathlessness, which are largely drug related. So those are probably the sort of non-pulmonary fibrosis targeted treatments that are most helpful.
Fabulous, thank you, Dan. Jeff or Kevin, anything to add on that one, or happy with that? Yeah.
No, I don't. Thank you. I don't think I'm at that point where I need that that rehabilitation at the moment. But obviously, I do know that exists, so it will be something I'll discuss with Dan a future time.
Yep. Thanks, Jeff. So, all right, we might go on to our next question. Now, this one, since all of you are currently in Queensland, I think you'd be able to answer. How do you cope with hot, humid weather? Do you find you get more breathless and tired?
Want me to go? I know over Christmas and New Year, we were in Caloundra at the time for Christmas and New Year, and the humidity was horrendous. It was well up, sort of in the 80s. It was very, very hot. So walking around or going up any steep hills or anything, it did become a problem. But fortunately, with the property had air conditioning, so you could come in and take a rest and cool down. But yes, that was a problem, the humidity. Once the humidity dropped and it went back to sort of normal, the heat didn't really affect me. It was just the humidity, and it was horrendous. But yeah, I don't think cold weather or hot weather really affects me at all. So yeah, I'm fine with that. It was just the humidity in Caloundra at the time.
Thanks, Jeff. Kevin, anything to add on?
Yeah, well, I suppose, Jeff, you'd be used to the cold. Kevin come from England. So, yeah, I totally agree with you. The humidity did knock me around, but I've got a friend staying with me at the moment, and he's come up with a good idea. To do his exercise, he'd go to the shopping centre and walk around the shopping centre for half an hour in the air conditioning. So I thought, well, simple, easy, do your shopping at the end of it. So no, the coughing is frustrating. I chewed a couple of vitamin C tablets on holiday and went into a coughing fit for about 5 hours, and that's when I blew my lung just through coughing, and I could not stop coughing. So I keep asking Professor Dan, can we please have a coughing cure too, please? But I think we'll leave him on the what his main core business is, and we'll worry about the coughing later on. A nice cold beer does help it, but not everyone drinks, so that's fine. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. All right, might move on to our next question. So this one might be more for Dan. What pitfalls might there be in going into other medication if the side effects of nintedanib are too much to continue with?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So the alternative medication is pirfenidone, and the main side effects with pirfenidone are particularly a rash in the sun. So, you know, it's difficult to tolerate if you spend a lot of time out in the sun. Nausea, sometimes loss of appetite, gastroesophageal reflux and fatigue are the main side effects of pirfenidone. It's a little bit more complicated to take because it's 3 times a day, that medication, and initially it's 3 little tablets 3 times a day. But they achieve pretty much the same effect. So they both slow the disease to the same extent. So there's nothing to choose between them in terms of efficacy, if you like. It's all about dosing and tolerability. And then, of course, the multiple clinical trials that are available through the PACT website.
Thank you, Dan. All right, and we might move to another question. This one more for consumers. How do you cope emotionally with diagnosis and increasing breathlessness? Open floor, Jeff or Kevin, whichever would like to take the lead.
Yeah, I go. Can you hear me? Sorry, I've ruined the view.
Yeah.
Well, being fit and active all my life, I've never smoked. I don't drink. I'm pretty boring in that respect. But I've always played football, cricket, swimming, as I said earlier. And to be diagnosed, my first reaction was I was very angry. I was very angry about it, and it's sort of almost like, why me? That faded away after a couple of days of shock and horror. And then I decided, what are you going to do about it? So I started doing some research. I joined some forums. I joined a charity in the UK. I've got contacts out in Australia. And basically, I was just trying to throw myself into what can I do to stop this? I don't think I'm angry about it anymore, which is quite good. And I'll try and handle that with humour, and I especially going to the clinic every 2 weeks and seeing the guys and the girls up there. Just it's enormous pleasure to go there and have the support. So it's really good. So my mood about it all is one of I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged by the telomeres trial that's probably going to start next year. I'm encouraged by the trial I'm on right now. That ultimately I want to stop the progression. I can be breathless for a little while as long as it doesn't progress. So I'm happy from that perspective.
Thanks, Jeff. Kevin, anything to add?
Sorry, me? Yeah, sorry, it's hard to hear you, Tara. Sorry, it seems quite muffled. No, I totally agree with Jeff's sentiments. I do enjoy a beer, but that's irrelevant. What else can I say? I just totally agree with what he said. Going back, the coughing is frustrating and embarrassing, but so be it. So if there's a lot of people out there worse off than me. So if I can do a little often and keep fit or keep fitter, you know, I'm on top of it. So yeah, totally agree with Jeff there.
Can I just add one thing? I was once asked, how can you ensure that you do exercise every day? And my answer to them was, get a dog, because you've got to take the dog out every day. And so go for a 3-mile walk with your dog once in the morning, once in the evening. You've done 6 miles or 10 kilometers, whatever you want to do. And that's your exercise. Throw a frisbee, throw a ball.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Kevin. Some very good practical tips there. Just a couple more questions. We did have one come through the chat box. This might be more for Dan. Do you have to live in a main city to be part of a trial?
That is a great question, and thank you for the question. And the answer is absolutely not. In Queensland, for example, the most regionalised of our states, we have many participants who come from a long way away. So just because you live a long way away is not a barrier. Usually the trial sponsor will pay for all travel and all expenses, so there'll be no out-of-pocket cost at all for the participant. And also, some trials do involve quite a lot of visits to the clinic, and so that may well not be practicable. But what's happened over the last 10 or 15 years is that the amount of assessments that are done through the trial is reducing, which is excellent. So, for example, a trial that's just about to start, which is a very exciting trial with a drug made by a company called Pliant, only has 4 visits over 12 months after the initial sort of assessment period. And so that's very doable, regardless of where you live. So the other thing that's happened, obviously, there's a lot of telehealth now. So we do conduct a lot of trial reviews via telehealth, which makes it much easier. There are some things where the person will need to travel to our site, but absolutely do not think that living a long way away from a major city is a barrier. And indeed, that's one of the main functions of PACT, is to make sure that people who don't live right next door to the trial centre, like Kev does, have access to clinical trials. I might just answer another question that I see in the quick Q&A there, if that's all right, Tara, just about hypersensitivity pneumonitis. So there've been a couple of questions. There were questions about scleroderma. So there are all of these different forms of pulmonary fibrosis. Many of those, yes, there are clinical trial opportunities. So you don't just have to have IPF, although most of the clinical trials are in IPF. But nintedanib, for example, is now available for people who have other forms of pulmonary fibrosis as well. So that's one thing to say. The other thing is that we now know that many of these other forms of pulmonary fibrosis are actually caused by the same gene abnormalities. And so we commonly will see a pattern of hypersensitivity pneumonitis in multiple family members who all have a shortening of the telomeres as the main problem. So the CT will often look a little bit different in those disorders, and I think the genetics explains a lot of that diversity of phenotype.
Fabulous. Thanks so much, Dan. We probably have time for one more question before we do wrap up. Now, this one is around oxygen. I think Jeff, you mentioned you're probably not at that stage yet. Kevin, I'm not sure if you've had experience, but Dan, you might know from other patients. But do you have oxygen machines as backup?
So I'm happy to take that, and Kev can give you his experience with his little oxygen concentrator that I made him take to Vegas with him. I was mainly worried about how excited he would get, next to the roulette wheel. And anyway, so oxygen, supplemental oxygen therapy, is often not that helpful early on in the disease course, because the sort of oxygen that we can deliver is still pretty cumbersome. So the main sort of oxygen that people will get is a plug-in concentrator that's a big machine that you plug into your mains power supply at home. It's not portable. You can only use it at home. And it can be very helpful if you've got very severe breathlessness with pulmonary fibrosis, but it's not portable. The portable concentrators, although they say portable, are still quite big because they're run by batteries. And so the battery technology is not quite there yet. But in the right circumstances, they can be helpful. And they are getting smaller. So, if we had a tiny little device that could just fit here and deliver extra oxygen there, and you could just walk around with it, I think awesome. But we don't have that yet. But the technology is definitely improving, and we'll get there where the batteries are small, last a reasonable period of time, and provide extra assistance. But it's a bit of a balancing act at the moment. But you don't need to have one as backup. No. So it's really for people who have more severe disease.
Could I just add to that, Professor Dan? I 2 batteries, and I only had to use one. Well, it's 4 batteries within one, and I didn't plug it in initially when I got on the plane, but 16 hours later it was still going. So it was pretty good. But I take your point; they are a little bit heavy, but it worked well for me, and it gave me peace of mind. That would be the nicest way. It was peace of mind that I didn't have to worry about any other things. So, yep, totally agree.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Dan, as well, for that comprehensive response. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today, but thank you everyone for submitting your questions. On behalf of Lung Foundation Australia, just wanted to say a big thank you to all our panellists today for sharing your experiences and insights with us. And we really appreciate you giving us your valuable time. I myself have learnt a lot from you all, and I'm sure our participants today would also agree that this space has provided some really inspiring insights. So just if you have any questions following today's webinar, as mentioned earlier, please feel free to reach out to our Information and Support Centre. The number is there on the screen, the 1800 number, and you can also email our inquiries inbox. You can also visit the Lung Foundation Australia website, and the link there is on the slide as well, or scan that QR code on the screen to take you directly to our Pulmonary Fibrosis Resource Hub. Just wanted to flag there are a few peer support options available for people living with pulmonary fibrosis or interstitial lung disease, such as online support group communities, face-to-face groups, as well as a one-on-one telephone-based peer support service, which Kevin touched on earlier, that he is a part of that Peer Connect program himself, but that service matches you with another peer living with pulmonary fibrosis. And again, you can ring our Information and Support Centre to find out more about how you can connect in with peer support. But that brings us to the conclusion of today's webinar. Thank you everybody for joining us. We hope you found this webinar helpful in answering some of your key questions around pulmonary fibrosis treatment pathways.